We want to acknowledge that we meet here on the traditional land of the Wurundjeri people. We appreciate and respect their continuing connection to land, culture and water. We pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and pay our respects to any First Nations folks who may be tuning in today. Today, on this day in National Reconciliation Week, we acknowledge the travesties inflicted on Aboriginal folks, the oldest living culture on the planet. We respect their beauty, resilience and strength in the face of unimaginable adversity and pain. To think about reconciliation is difficult, considering the very definition of reconciliation is the healing of a once existent, harmonious relationship. This, unfortunately, is not our history. It is not Australia's truth, but we are committed to it being our future. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. This year's reconciliation theme is more than a word. Reconciliation takes action. So if there's something that you do today, visit www.wurundjeri.com.au to learn about the vibrant community in which you exist and take a step towards knowing our true history.
For our episode today, just wanted to pop up a quick content warning. We will be discussing topics around dysphoria, gender dysphoria, physical dysphoria, and relationship with body and self throughout the transitional process, as well as touching on elements of human biology. Should this be of concern to you, please be aware of this now and feel free to pause before continuing.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Big Daddy, Little Daddy podcast. This is episode 2, coming to you live from our living room in lockdown together.
Lockdown 4 point whatever we're at, yeah?
Yeah. And today we thought we'd have a chat just about our respective transition experiences from all the way from childhood to present day, and what those experiences looked and felt like for us as individuals. I thought it'd be good for it to be shared so that we can show, I guess, like what we're about and how our respective journeys and transit and gender identities have basically made us into the people we are today.
Well, that's it. Like we spoke about in the first episode a little about kind of like who we are and where we're sort of at now, but it's really important to kind of highlight the journey or the milestones or the steps or just the lived experience that have pretty much created who we are as people now. And literally everything we're speaking about also really highlights and talks back to how different we actually are, which I kind of love anyway.
That's it. I think this is like of all the things that we butt heads on and the different interests and like characteristics and traits we have, this is just like another massive highlighter of how chalk and cheese we are, because like you can barely stand our two journeys up together in any way, shape or form.
No, you can't. And there's a lot of interlink and interwoven intricacies, but elements of that I think is purely because we've been in each other's lives for so long. But if you actually put our lived experience on paper, you can actually see how very, very different it is, but we also identify differently.
Yeah, for sure. I think it highlights like the beauty of and the importance of the notion of transitions in general, not being linear and coming in every single different size, shape and form, and them all being valid and very, very deeply personal. So I think it's really, I don't know, it's like fun and exciting and interesting to compare notes with you at times.
It can be, because there of course there's some shared hilarities and some shared, if you know type vibe. But then there's that whole other flip side, and it's I didn't really think about it that way. It's not. It's taking a step back and being able to empathize is not necessarily the right word. It's just, I guess, it's awareness around different identities, different journeys, which also aid to perspective and I guess just that sharing of information and the more understanding and knowledge being power, understanding between each other, it breaks down fear, it breaks down any potential bias or conflict in between all of these respective identities, and it just comes back to the, hey, there's room for all of us.
I also think like doing things like this and sharing our stories can potentially instill a sense of like hope and I don't know, relatability for people that might be, I guess, questioning or concerned about the idea of transitioning or just getting a landing on their identity in general, you know, because I know I had that scary part of my journey, the fear of the unknown, the uncertainty, fear of change, all that sort of stuff. You know, so I consider and celebrate wildly different journeys for trans people as absolute successes, regardless of what they look or feel like. You know?
Yeah, and I guess with it, you know, we might as well start kind of like pulling it back from the beginning, and it's you have different conversations with different trans and gender diverse people, and there's whether it's the coming out story, again, we're just going to use that language for now, or whatever it might before that coming out story. Is it the aha moment? Is it a build up of things that make you go, I guess for you, where was that kind of like acknowledgement or understanding of, yes, I sit in this space, like the trans space and all of that? Where does that sit for you?
For me, mine was like, I was such a late bloomer, I guess you could say. My journey, when I reflect back on it, it began at a very, very early age, but that included a lot of shame and rejection around those concepts. So I still remember being like, you know, an extremely little kid. I was probably about 14 or so when I figured out that I was gay, at the very least.
That old chestnut.
And that's a whole nother story to even begin with. But I remember even around that time, I was quite an isolated teenager because I only had one sibling, and I had, you know, a home.
Northern New South Wales.
Yeah, in Port Macquarie. I was like the only gay in the village. My dad and my mum had separated, and you know, obviously going through puberty and the misery of you know, finding my sexuality in a town where it didn't really exist. But I still remember feeling like I still hadn't quite figured out what was going on for me in that regard. And I still remember, like, I was a little, you know, computer nerd, and I'd get on the internet and I'd research and stuff. And I remember sort of researching.
All the YouTube videos, 1 year on HRT.
Oh, God, there was...
You weren't the only one.
But it wasn't even that. Like, it was actually just researching the concepts of transness, transgender people, trans identities.
There's no language then to be able to explain the way that we can now.
Like, I never stumbled upon any videos of people, you know, recording their journeys. It wasn't even that sort of developed at that stage. It was just like, what is a trans? You know?
What are trans?
Yeah. And I just remember like vehemently rejecting it because I'm like, oh, no, no, I'm not. Like, I'm not a man. Yuck. And like having this like already weird internalized transphobia because it didn't look or feel right. So that was like the beginning of my rejection. Like, and then that just like kicked off this long-term compartmentalization of any sort of self-interrogation when it came to my gender. So then I spent, you know, another decade plus of hating myself and hating identifying as female, and never really doing anything with it. And then
because you were looking into this, researching, doing your own, you know, self-reflection long before I even picked up a needle. Do you know what I mean? Like, and was years before almost.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why it's so crazy, you know, because it's, I guess it's because for me, being non-binary, there was less accessibility to those concepts back then, and then even up until the point where, you know, you came out as trans male, and you kicked off your journey and stuff. Like, there was still like, it wasn't until I was about, I don't know, it was maybe like 5-6 years ago that I even learned or heard of the term non-binary, or the simple concept of like gender being anything less than the two binary notions and nothing, anything in between. So for me, like that point, all those years later, that was the crazy aha moment for me. It was like this ultimate weight off my shoulders. And I knew as soon as I started realizing that non-binary, and being non-binary and that as a gender identity and the capability of identifying as anything that wasn't, male or female was possible and a reality. That for me, that was the turning point. That was my little aha moment, and I just felt like all of this weight that had been, resting on my heart and my soul for years and years, just like shifted immediately.
And you may not, but do you remember the time when you first heard the term or understood it? It's been a long time now, but
look, I embarrassingly think it was, some like hideous Tumblr screenshot or something. Like, I don't even know, but it was like...
Hey, we haven't even gotten to mine yet, so there's no shame at all how you found out, like, accessibility information is how you found out.
I didn't have a Tumblr.
Excuse me, I did. How dare you?
Well, I did not. But it was just, it was one of those just random moments on social media when you're in a black hole. And then you're like,
what this?
Sorry, what? and then so it begins. So that for me, like, that was my definite aha moment. And I guess, like, comparatively, without getting into my whole history from there on in, what did that look like for you?
Well, I never heard the term transgender or anything anywhere near it until, and this is going to be hilarious, till I was about, I want to say 18. I was 18, and it was Max from the L Word. That was literally the first bit of visibility that I ever had. At the time, I'd never met a trans person in my life. I probably came out as a lesbian 2 years-ish prior, very similarly only gay in the village while I was living in, like, southwest Sydney, and it was a lot more densely populated than where you are at the time, because the first stage of our coming out was probably quite similar in terms of age and things, but then to transition or to start the process 2 years later at 18, because I've got 10 years, 11 years, 10 and a bit years on you in terms of HRT.
Well, yeah, I'm like 2.5.
You're 2.5
ish.
I'm like 13 and a half at this point. Yeah. It didn't exist. Nobody I knew. I'd never met another trans person. That's a lie. I'd only ever been familiar with the concept of trans femininity. So it's trans women, all of that, like nothing from a masculine lens.
Also, side point, Max from the L Word is like the most repugnant representation of a trans male.
Look, lots of issues, but at the time, that was the only context.
Exactly. And it's like, it's so sad that it was such a horrible representation.
Oh, look, I'm not too happy with some of the current ones either.
I know, but at least it was representation nonetheless.
Absolutely.
And you could take from it what you needed in order to...
100%. Like, did it hold the test of time? God, no.
Yeah.
But did it open up the doors? Whereas that was kind of a light bulb moment, not in a must do this, want to do this, etc. That was my first avenue for understanding a possibility, that it was even a thing, this was something that could happen. But let's be real, we all know how fast I move. It was between that and the quickest path possible at the time. Access to psychiatric care and HRT was a lot longer than it is now, and it probably took me about, I think the process was about 6 to 8 months potentially from going yes to booking the GP appointment, which I'm very interested to hear that access to care change as well, so I might park that one and hold that in a minute. But yeah, I remember, like, 19th of March, that is my T date. Every year it's the thing that you remember without even trying. But I view, while I absolutely have full appreciation and understanding for all things in terms of nuance within gender spectrum and everything, I identify with a very binary concept for me, and that doesn't invalidate you, and that's just the way that it works kind of for me. And I guess that potentially is one of the reasons why of the tenure between our respective journeys and experiences, because what I wanted was there and visible earlier. And if you talk about it from a not contraceptive, Sam, that doesn't work in this circle. From a comprehension perspective, if you go from like cis-het binary, okay, to trans binary, then you've got to get down to not the concept of non-binary. That would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, so from 18 and then a few months later, I started HRT, and that was virtually it. And one thing I would definitely, like, I love talking about in terms of understanding, because coming back to that concept of visibility and access to information and access to care and a few things, that's the reason another one of the reasons why we are doing this podcast, is because we didn't have us growing up. So by being able to break down the walls and give this information and give these perspectives, understanding that these are our perspectives, like those coming after us, it's important that they actually hear this.
Definitely. And I think, it's really important to think about, like, the decisions, like, I don't personally know if I had been able to access information sooner rather than later, whether or not that would have expedited my decision to go on T. I'll never know, because, again, we're extremely different, where, I think that you are so steadfast in knowing who you were always meant to be.
Mm.
There's no question about that. You were a man, and as soon as you had the capability and the accessibility to the healthcare that you required
to describe and all the
exactly
things, absolutely,
to allow yourself to transition in a way where your body matches who you are as a person. For me, like, it's never been as simple and as clear cut for me.
Yeah.
And I'm extremely proud of being AFAB. When I think back and I look at how my life has panned out, I wouldn't want it any other way. I'm proud of my transness and my identity, but I'm also almost grateful that it wasn't the other way around. When I look at myself as a non-binary person, I love the fact that I was socialized as female. I love my biology. I love my gentleness. I love all of the things that still make up who I am today, because I'm AFAB. You know what I mean? For me, that's very sacred and very important. And my journey towards making the decision around going on T was quite lengthy and quite stressful as I tried to factor in the changes and whether or not they would be more beneficial or detrimental for me, for a variety of reasons, both physical and emotional, and also just like kind of scarily and selfishly from a romantic perspective as well. And again, like we have crossovers with that sort of stuff. But it was that sort of thing. Like, for me, I think I mentioned it last time in the first podcast. It's really hard. It's just as painful being pegged as female as it is being pegged as male. So I always had to deal with the decision of, okay, am I going to let the pendulum swing in the opposite direction? Because there's no real way to present as, like, I've always been extremely androgynous, but there's no possible way just in today's society to actually present as like something that like
there's no universal.
There's no one way to look non-binary, and because it's like, and that's it. You don't have to look a certain way to look non-binary. You don't have to be equal parts masculine, equal parts feminine. That's in no way a concept, but because by and large, general society only has, a one-track mind, and you either look like a man or you look like a woman. It makes it infinitely harder to feel like you can be validated or you can validate your identity without the presumption day in and day out. So for me, that was a huge grapple, and something that I've had to just continually reconcile over time. And so today, I love the way I look. I'm proud of the way I look. It took me a long time to get there.
Well, absolutely, all of that is completely relevant to your journey and your experience, and the whole purpose of this podcast is highlighting the differences in journeys and stuff from there. So, as a lot of those things that you said, I can identify with, as they don't resonate with me, and while they don't invalidate you whatsoever, it's just speaking to our differences there. Like, dysphoria is still something that rears its ugly head on a very consistent basis. I never identified with or, the concept of not feeling comfortable within your respective skin or body, those original archaic terms, sit very strongly with me still, 13 years on.
Yeah.
And it's a continual work on and discussion. We all have our own internal monologues and things in certain ways. But mine definitely hones in a lot more in terms of physicality, which is for some sometimes a surprise, considering what I do for a living, running facilities, running gyms, working with body sculpting, and for those that do wish for it, as well as just general access to fitness spaces and health spaces for trans and diverse people. But in terms of, I guess, aligning myself, it's a continual work on. It's a continual thing for me and my version of my success, so to speak, for what I consider to be successful for my transition. It's forever evolving, and medicine, accessibility to care, and in terms of surgical options, if that's something that I wish to, it is not. There isn't a light at the end of the tunnel per se, so it has to be not a resignation of sorts, but you do have to make your peace at a certain point.
I think it's also super important to note, because that's often there's often like a rhetoric that exists around people's transitions that like you're not trans if you don't have dysphoria. Or on the flip side, like once you take steps, whether they're medical or otherwise, within your transition, that your dysphoria is just going to be eradicated, which is completely
crock of shit. Absolute crock of shit.
You don't need to feel dysphoria to be trans, and you also, like, for a lot of people, it's something that you live with every single day. And it's like, to speak to my experience, it's one thing that's I've always found to be really important is like your support network, as well as the accessibility to healthcare and things that you've mentioned. Because one thing that also I think, it interrupted and delayed my decision-making process in terms of going on HRT was the reception I received from my partner at the time, trying to come out as trans. And that stuff can stay with you. That it literally is a traumatic event for me.
Yes, I was there for that. Yes,
and so if you don't have the support of your partner and or the people around you, that can really, really impact and can exacerbate things like dysphoria as well. But my current partner Jamie, like, I don't know if I would have gotten through that dark time without her. Like when my dysphoria was at its worst, I remember trying to get up for work every day and being late to work by almost an hour every single morning because I was on the floor in pieces because nothing fit on my body according to my brain. I couldn't step out the front door without feeling absolutely horrendous and like incapable of facing society. And she would be there on the phone with me every morning, like helping me pick my outfits over the phone, reassuring me that like everything was going to be okay. You know what I mean? And that like I don't think that I would have overcome the deepest, darkest levels of dysphoria that I was experiencing at that time without her and other loved ones celebrating me and showing support and reminding me that, you know, that regardless of what you look like or how you feel, you know, it's all valid. And
absolutely, and
you know,
and that's a positive experience. And definitely, when I first started transitioning, my partner at the time, you know, she was paramount in my ability to hold myself together at certain points. But like I hid away for the first 5 years. I went to work, I came home. That was it. The public didn't see me. I didn't leave the house. That was kind of how I processed. And everyone's going to do it a little bit differently. Some people are going to have partners and awesome networks. Some people are going to do it alone, away, which is unfortunate.
Some people have to do it in lockdown.
Some people have to do it in lockdown. But also, like, I can absolutely understand and identify more with doing things a little bit more so on your own at certain points. That's just the difference between you and I at certain things. And it's the question that I constantly keep asking, and I would be lying if certain concepts of dysphoria this far along does not come up in therapy at points. Like, that would be a direct lie. Of course it does. But it comes down to different strategies you're going to use, different people you spend your time with, how you work with your energy. And, you know, sometimes, as we all know, partners can be phenomenal, but partners can also be life-destroying at the same time when it comes to dysphoria. And, you know, mine, I can absolutely pin back to a very toxic relationship that I had. And I'm not going to name and shame who they are because that's just not what this place is for. But that's taken X amount of years to still claw back from. And I guess to kind of pull all of this point back together is understanding that these, like, whether it's dysphoria, sense of self, whatever it is, it's going to be forever evolving and ever changing as your journey kind of goes along. And the message through it, if you're someone that's just starting this journey for yourself, wherever it sits, or, you know, you're X amount of the way through it and it seems a little bit unnerving, is a bit lost at the moment, like, it does get better. And I guess what I mean by that is you find ways, you have your people, you work through, and it's going to require some work. It's going to require a lot of head and heart work to kind of get through. But it's, if we can pass on any message of hope, so to speak, that yes, it does get better, and there are queers and gender diverse people that are living, like, vibrantly through this, still working through all the same things that you are now, and some achieving that level of comfort and success, for lack of a better word, whatever you want to call it, and others are still working their way there. But it comes in ebbs and flows, like, and it will continually trend in the right direction over time, as you said, like progress, or this journey is not linear.
Yeah. And I think it's so easy to get bogged down in, like, I think we've probably all been guilty of doing it, but, you know, fixating on people in social media profiles.
Get off social media, shit.
You know, and I think it's really important to remind yourself that, like, people orchestrate Instagrams so stunningly to present the best version of themselves. Exactly. And, you know,
hands up, I'm guilty. I've been more guilty of it in the past, actively trying to undo elements of that narrative. We've all done it.
And yeah, the best of us forget that, you know, every single person is still going through something. And Oftentimes, whatever's presented on social media is a facade, or it's just a fleeting moment that is shared with the world that doesn't really consider the reality of life, and whether or not we are struggling from a transitional perspective or not. And so it's like, if that, even when it doesn't seem like there's any light at the end of the tunnel, when it does come to struggling over dysphoria, or obtaining the medical care and attention that you require in order to overcome these things. Like, it's that you still have the opportunity to get access to that. You still have an opportunity to grow and evolve and overcome the pain that you feel, or the disconnection from your sense of self. And it's all hard internal work.
It is.
And it is painful. But
it is.
None of us are incapable of it,
No, but that's the thing though. Like, it's going to require, as much as we don't want to do it at certain points, you've got to tackle some of these things head on. And I guess this is a good segue in terms of like the access to care and the availability over time and the difference. And I guess also for potentially some of our like younger listeners, a bit of perspective as well. That in terms of, I guess, navigating and potentially bearing with a few elders at points, understanding the journey of progress, and not in a, oh, you've got it so much easier now. It's more of an awareness piece, understanding that everyone's on different journeys, everyone has come different lengths and have overcome different obstacles to kind of get to where they are now. And I know if we're talking just access to HRT, let's just pop it that way, for those that to decide to medically transition, medical transition or HRT in any form does not validate or invalidate the concept of any identity whatsoever. But once again, talking from lived experience, this is our respective lived experience because we're both on HRT. I remember it was 6 months of psychiatric appointments with no benefit. It was about $400 a session back in the day, where you had to pretty much, and it was DSM-4 at the time, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual version 4. You had to tick X amount of boxes or something.
So it's like still considered a mental illness?
Yes. Because it was removed in the DSM-5. I can't remember the exact dates have skipped me now, but you had to be diagnosed with, gender dysphoria, which is what I was at the time, to be able to access HRT. But first you had to get the psychiatrist, the report. Then you had to get physicals from the GP to check a few things. Had to go and then see the endocrinologist, which is the hormone specialist, for more blood panel work and a few things, and constantly through all of these medical professionals having to keep rehashing your experience, which in and of itself can be highly traumatizing for some people if you're constantly having to seek validation from someone that has never met you prior today, because they are gatekeeping your entire life, because as is their role at the time.
And essentially reopening the wound every single time.
Pretty much. Yeah. And 13 years ago, the understanding, the compassion, the empathy, the consideration is not what it is now. It was really quite gross. Even after jumping through all of these loopholes, as at an 18, 19, however old I was at the time, it was a constantly having to defend your stance. Like, why do you need this? What are you doing? Are you sure you want to? After jumping through all of these hoops. And I am absolutely a mental health advocate. Ensure you're having someone to talk to, all of these things, because these are big, important life decisions to make. But there is a line. Like, grow up.
That's it. I think, the word that stands out quite prevalently with me when you're explaining your experience is gatekeeping. And it's that we're definitely shifting into a space where there's far more accessibility, there's far more trust in people's, ability to make decisions for their own benefit, bodily autonomy, that sort of thing.
Which is all great.
Yeah, and I'm a massive advocate for the informed consent model because, there has to be due diligence that occurs. You know what I mean? But yeah, we definitely have to acknowledge how difficult and how gatekeepery it was back then for you. And on the flip side, the day that I walked in and my tea date, 24th of October.
I can roll my eyes at you every time you tell this story.
and well, that's it. And I mean, obviously bearing in mind the context, I was 30 years old.
I was 18.
Having a conversation with a well-established GP that I had a relationship with. So there was already a relationship there. There was also already a notion and understanding of my capability of understanding the impacts of potentially going on T. But to just completely present an alternative picture to your experience, that appointment that I went to, the day that I walked out with a script for testosterone, I didn't even intend to get a script for testosterone that day, but I walked out with it after the discussion that unfurled in that appointment. And obviously after, the months and months and months, almost a year of umming and ahhing and trying to decide what I wanted to do and whether or not it was the best choice for me. But in terms of accessibility, all I had to do was develop a relationship with a GP and using the informed consent model, have an assurance that I did understand the implications. And then I literally was, and obviously also I had blood work done. So, there was no lack of, attention and due diligence given from a health perspective. Well, so that happened as well.
Yeah.
But just I did not have to spend thousands of dollars seeing a psychiatrist to have them sign off on a mental illness. I didn't have to prove anything beyond the fact that I that I have awareness and understanding and bodily autonomy. So it's awesome that we've come a long way, but it's also really, really sad that and important for us to remind ourselves and appreciate and honor the absolute turmoil that a lot of our previous community members and family have gone through in order to achieve what we can achieve quite more simply in this day and age.
And I think also looking extension beyond that, because while absolutely in what I do and the spaces I'm in, I encounter a lot of young, either transgender, diverse questioning, because queer humans especially moving into the HRT space and, what sort of health insurance should we get, things like that, all of that stuff, which absolutely I personally went through, got on all the groups, did all the things. But I also find now that because of where I am, I find my gaze starting to look at, well, what's happening after you are 7, 9, 10, 15 years on HRT? What's kind of happening from there? It's absolutely the accessibility to care and the beginning part is all starting to kind of find its pace and its support network. But it's once you hit past 5 years, 7 years, you're gone. You have, quote unquote, successfully achieved, and these aren't my words, successfully achieved, you have completed your transition. You have gotten to where you need to go. You have passed go. You've collected $200, catch you, see you, bye. Whereas, and that's where my concern is if the support the support that needs to go alongside all of this care is not continued on, especially when, and once again, I can only talk to my lived experience, especially for those that are socialized one way and now live another, there is a whole gap missing there and an expected assimilation that leaves huge gaps in terms of potential mental health concerns for transgender diverse people moving forward.
100%. And the health implications.
There's no research. There's no long-term research for us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Long-term hormone replacement therapy. There's only the research has only begun to be collected in the last 30-ish, 40-ish years, if that. There aren't longitudinal studies. There aren't publications that have been,
no, there isn't. And like a lot of the research around hormone replacement therapy and stuff that I've read is a lot to do with
reviewed by
peer reviewed.
The actual scientific journals that are peer reviewed. There's nothing of that.
There's not a lot. The stuff that I read is mainly around gym and steroid use and learning and understanding that, because that's a part of my professional life. But you don't see anything because all of the case studies and the focus groups they're not us.
And they're also
cis humans.
Yeah, and they're also like extreme examples. So overuse and abuse of something like testosterone. And what about trans women as well? It's exactly like, regardless of the hormonal therapy that you're on, we're all in the same boat. And it is scary because there isn't, like you said, mental health support, but also like ongoing health maintenance and support for elder trans people.
Yeah. And it even comes down to within our own community, and I'm not sorry to say it, but once you get to a certain point, or I guess as a part of like any sort of queer identity, it's be you, live your life, do your thing, we love you, kind of whatever. But then once you have achieved what you want, depending on what that stereotype is, or what that archetype, that avatar that you're going towards, you've now pushed outside of the boundary. You're on your own, especially with a lot of elder trans people that have identifying in a certain way that they want to. And I can't see, and this could just be confirmation bias or a few things, I don't necessarily see this, and it could just be because the concept of non-binary by comparison or the language for it is still quite new, but I see it with a lot of elder binary trans people, trans women, trans men.
But what exactly are you saying that you see in?
I am seeing a lot of like boxing out.
Right. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, based on our experience.
By the community.
Yeah, and because, like, I know that there was a gap of a few years where we were living in different cities, but for the most part of our relationship, we have lived together in the vicinity of one another. So our experiences are very similar in terms of just what we see by going out, I guess. And
even the way you and I are treated differently in spaces.
But I think, I think that I can support that perspective based on what I've seen and experienced as well. There's almost you sort of get to a certain point if you're trying to immerse yourself in the queer and trans community. But if you get to a certain age, it's it's like you've just turned into an overripe avocado.
Yeah, see, bye. We're done now.
And it's all like that concept that once you've if you've been on HRT for X amount of time, you're no longer seeing the very visual and obvious changes that come along with that. Therefore, you've reached peak transness or whatever, or your transition is complete. Therefore, you don't require any more support, moral or otherwise, which is absolutely just not the case.
That's garbage.
And so to suggest that there's a boxing out, I think absolutely in both of our experiences, we have both seen that. And there's just like an absolute hyper focus on, baby queers and baby trans, up and coming, what's going on for them, what's happening, which is fantastic because
the support needs to be there at all levels. Absolutely,
you want to nurture.
Oh God, yeah.
You want to nurture every
little babies.
Exactly, but you want to nurture your community holistically.
Yes.
And so to only focus all of your attention and energy on one aspect of the community, it's doing other facets of the community a total and utter disservice, especially when there's so much reciprocal learning and support that can occur if you give it, if you actually invest in it.
Yes.
So we're losing out on history, information, support, and knowledge from people that have different experiences, different perspectives, different education. We're only, shooting ourselves in the foot by doing it, really.
And I get the thing that I kind of see with that, where the struggle is, regardless of whether it is wanted, well received, or completely pushed up against, there is an awareness and of straight passing privilege, which absolutely has to be acknowledged to an extent. And while it may not have been wanted, you need to acknowledge when you have it. And I know that this is also a new thing for you. The longer you have been on HRT, you're starting to experience some of these things in a way you haven't before. Yep, and it has its own kettle of fish that I'll let you discuss. I've obviously been aware of it a lot longer, and I'm fully aware that I look like the physical representation of fear within the queer community, a big white straight man. Not the case, just in case you were all wondering. But it's and like the question is, like, no one should be forced to flag in any which way they want to.
Yeah.
But it's almost like, to be accepted within your own community, if you don't have a billboard the size of, the entirety of Lygon Street in Brunswick, you're going to get closed out of a conversation. What are you doing in the space?
It's a gross like forced flagging, isn't it? And that's what I was saying a little bit earlier when I said, there are a multitude of reasons why my decision to go on HRT was delayed for quite some time. And I'm not ashamed to say it, that part of it was because I was so afraid of it like irrevocably impacting my romantic life, because I don't want to be perceived as male. I don't want the type of people that I'm attracted to no longer be attracted to me, if they once were. And now, based on the way I look, they're no longer attracted to me, which is completely fine, because we absolutely do not gatekeep what it means and looks and feels like in terms of sexual attraction to people. Of course
not, but
it's the thing of I don't want to draw attention or attraction from people who think that I'm a man. I want to be able to engage with people without having to out myself every time, without having to flag dramatically that I'm not a man.
And that's not saying you're not proud of who you are in any sense of the word.
Exactly.
It also kind of brings up a parallel, probably less than nice thought, of the concept of potentially having to live inauthentically just to, receive basic human need of like comfort, love, affection, physical affection, all the things. And it's that delicate balance of, this is really important to me, and I really need this. And right now, or for the 10, that outweighed your need for either HRT or potentially like living a certain way until it didn't.
Yeah.
Whereas I was the other way. I flicked that off earlier because this was more important.
Yeah. And it was, but it was also just like the societal standards. It wasn't just solely the fear of it, impacting on my romantic life. It was the social aspects as well, and the energy and the investment that I have had to go through, like that I have to invest in to make it be known that I'm not a man and that sort of thing. And it's really, really depressing when, to have somebody tell you that they're potentially not going to be attracted to you should you make a decision that's going to save your life. Like, do you know what I mean? It's like,
that's shit. That's absolutely, it's horrible. Like all of it's horrible. I can't be with you if you X. Oh, you're X, sods.
Not good enough for me.
Exactly, all the things, And even, getting full well into it, and the person you're engaging with knows and then changes their mind like halfway through, a year through, it's all gross.
And look, it's unfortunately that's like you can't blame or punish someone. You can, like, attraction levels to someone can cease at any given moment.
Of course they can. Doesn't matter who you are. Yeah.
Like, everyone is entitled to, not want to engage with someone for their own reasons, obviously in terms of like what they are sexually and romantically attracted to, obviously to the exclusion of discrimination or otherwise, like not talking about that. And it's okay if it's okay for people to transition in relationships and then those relationships fall apart, because you do look different. It changes your emotional, capabilities in drastic ways and varying ways for different people. It can change who you are as a person. And, it's, if you are no longer compatible with someone thereafter, that's also okay. But it's kind of like, it's that fear of being told, I don't want to engage with you, I don't love you because you made this decision. You know what I mean? And it's
if that's your go-to, like,
exactly. So it's they're two different sides of the coin. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And obviously, it's very complicated and nuanced. So it's not a grand statement about people not being entitled to fall out of love with people post-transition, because that's absolutely not the case.
Yeah, and it's how you approach it, and it's the reasons why. And people grow apart. Remove HRT. People grow apart and grow differently all the time.
Exactly.
Like, it's a case of, don't use that as the blame game, basically.
Yeah.
But I think amongst a lot of the heavy topics and conversations that we've been having today, I think it is important to stress a few things. Especially for our younger listeners, because for me, that's where it's even more important. You absolutely can have healthy, viable, loving relationships on HRT or with any particular gender identity whatsoever.
Should I make that disclaimer?
I think you should.
Even though that was like a paralyzing fear of mine, I'm like, no one's going to love me if I look like a man. Or, and
there's nothing wrong with wanting to look like a man. Thank you very
much. But
case in point.
Exactly. But I just like that like absolute fear that I was like, if I change, no one is going to love me. I can tell you 100% that it is not the truth. And I'm very loved for who I am.
But you need to love yourself first. You need to spend some time. You won't win every single day.
I love myself.
Yeah, we know. I live with you. We fucking know. And it's an evolving conversation. It's coming back going, yes, regardless of whatever your journey is, regardless of if it started like absolute rat shit or if it started great, like it is yours. It's going to go up and down in terms of wavelengths and timelines and milestones that you set. Everyone's going to have their own, and what might really affirm you might be horrible for somebody under the same umbrella. And our conversations and our journeys that we've literally spoken about just here in this is the case of that. And it gets better. Like, while absolutely acknowledge your feelings, sit in them, live them, but don't stay in them. There is a lot of access to healthcare supports, good social networks that you didn't have 5, 10, 15 years ago that you do have access to now. But it doesn't take away from, I guess, I don't want this conversation for me to be a pit of despair. While it is an acknowledgement and a discussing lived experience that includes some of those pain points, I do want to kind of bring to light the joy at the end of it. after making those important decisions, and then us, at least for me, living authentically, that while there is some, I guess, there are some rocks you've got to drag along with it, the alternative for me was always worse.
Yeah. It's it's a good reminder that whilst we're talking about many of the downs or the lows, there are so many highs as well. And it's just
wins.
Yeah, it's just the same with any life experience, trans related or not. You know, you're gonna have your ups and downs, and you know, we're not suggesting that like any transition always has to be steeped in pain.
No, and some people will never.
Exactly,
never
you know,
it.
and like, bless them. I wish nothing but health and happiness, and no struggle or hardship along the way for anybody's transition or search or realization of gender identity or otherwise. But I reckon on that note, we'll put in, you know, in our socials, maybe some links just to... So
there's someone that you need to have a talk to, because, you know, we're not mental health professionals. We do not pretend that we are in any way, shape or form.
No.
And while absolutely, you know, we do our best what we can with our people and provide space, and the same with anyone that slides into our respective DMs, we will absolutely provide all of those links for extended care and other services if you feel that the need, or if there's anyone that you particularly feel that could benefit from there. But
that's in terms of there's social networks, there are websites, there are gender diverse clinics for mental health, for physical health, all those sorts of things. Maybe we'll just chuck a few up that are really beneficial.
Yeah, we're not going to have all of them, but yeah, definitely some of the ones that have benefited us.
In Melbourne and Victoria, but also like if there's something that's lacking, you can just message us as well.
And also, you know, anyone that has any access to really good services or care that would love for us to share with our listeners, you know, jump onto our Instagram, tag us bigdaddy.littledaddy. On Instagram, we can share it, and we can share it here. We can share it on Instagram. We can share it on our YouTube, all of that kind of stuff. I guess to kind of wrap this episode up in terms of understanding of your particular identity, or if there's any certain points that you wanted to really, or message you want to kind of get through, sum up your experience.
My experience was slowly then all at once.
Yeah,
that's like the best way to describe mine. And I think it's really important to focus on that fact that it's just as valid, and regardless of my avid and active rejection of my identity for so long. I'm still so grateful of where I am today. And I don't resent myself. I don't regret anything. It's all just a learning curve. And I literally, like, I'm so proud of who I am now. And it doesn't mean that I wasn't proud of who I was before I found my way. It's not about that. It's you know, and you know how I feel about corny motivational quotes.
You're best friends with me, but
I know,
that one
but
out.
it really is a case. Like, it's, you know, life is just so non-linear in general, and you just can't compare your own experience to anyone else's, because.
And please stop. Like, from us to you, if you are doing this now, take a second, little bit of internal reflection. Like, your life is yours. Don't project that onto somebody else. Please and thank you.
Yeah, I think all I'm hoping for by sharing my experience is perhaps relatability, or even just, I don't know, camaraderie in non-relatability. You know, it's just shining a light on how unique and special we all are. Really, that's really it.
Yeah,
what about you?
No, and I think the added layer that for me, so that the reason and that message that I think is quite strong in reference to everything that I try to do with putting into this is that hope, is that that it does get better. As we mentioned before, you and I didn't have us growing up. Like, we didn't see successful, or, success in whatever way you want to define it. Successful queers living authentically with smiles on their faces, having good relationships, having people that love them. All we would hear was, unfortunately, very triggering and, transphobic media representation, or we were the only ones in our own circle, or just horrible, romantic experiences. And I kind of want to be here and say, yeah, it may have started quite shit for me, but I've got a loving partner. I've got really, I've got stable housing. I've got, I've got a good network of people around me, and there is a level of belief that you can have that too. Yeah, you're okay. You're all right. You're here. You're sitting across from me. But like, everyone can have that too. Like, don't take no for an answer. Don't succumb to your current circumstances. And that is not at all saying ignore the way you're feeling in any way, shape, or form. It is saying that you do not, where you are right now, you do not have to stay here. You have a choice to start making steps to actively move forward. Little Daddy, where can they find us?
If you guys don't know already as well, we are recording the video of these podcasts. I don't know if I should be telling people, because you're going to have to look at our ridiculous faces.
You want to look at our faces. We're on YouTube.
You can watch our podcast visually on, it's just Big Daddy, Little Daddy on YouTube. Mm-hmm. Where else are we? We're on
Spotify. Yep, same deal. So everything is, BDLD, Big Daddy, Little Daddy. All of our links are on Instagram. We'll pop them in the show notes.
It's got a link tree in the description of our Instagram.
Absolutely.
You can go there for everything.
Yeah, we also have an email address where by all means you can absolutely send us questions, and we'll pop all of that in the show notes. So, available Spotify, Google Podcasts. Email address is the bdldpodcast@gmail.com. I think it is. I'm probably full of shit.
It's in the description of our Instagram.
We'll put it on Instagram. We'll put it on everything. And, we're going to start from moving forward. We're going to start involving a few more guests, getting some other experiences. But we'd absolutely love to hear from you. Just give us a thumbs up, hit subscribe, share it with everyone that you think is going to benefit. And little mention especially to all of our friends here in Victoria in lockdown as well. We see you, we hear you, we hope you are looking after yourself. We'll pop those access to healthcare links again in all of the show notes. And we hope you have an amazing day whenever this is going to get launched for the next few days. We'll probably all still be in lockdown together, but that's okay. We're here.